The day he threw me out, I stood on the polished marble floor of the foyer, the coldness seeping through the thin soles of the slippers I was still wearing, feeling every millimeter of the immense space around me. This wasn't my home, though it should have been. It was his, my son's. And he was standing at the grand staircase, looking down at me as if I were a piece of misplaced trash that needed immediate disposal. His eyes, my own eyes, in a crueler, harder version held no warmth, no flicker of the filial love I had spent 50 years cultivating. Only ice. Mother, honestly, he sighed, the sound echoing in the cathedral ceiling, laced with pure, unadulterated annoyance. I thought we had established this. The house is sold. Your belongings were moved to the storage unit last week. You can't just keep appearing here. I felt the blood drain from my face, not because of the shock. The betrayal had been a slow, poisoning leak over the last 5 years, but because of the sheer audacity of his performance. He was treating me like a neighbor who had overstayed her welcome, not the woman who had sacrificed her career, her savings, her peace of mind to ensure his success. Jonathan. My voice was a reedy whisper, barely recognizable. Where am I supposed to go? I gave you the deed to the townhome, just like your father wanted, to help you with the initial financing for this palace. You promised I could stay in the North Wing until I sorted out my retirement annuity. You know my savings are gone. He descended 2 steps, close enough now for me to smell the expensive cologne, the scent of success built on my ruin. He stopped and tilted his head, a predatory gesture. Mother, let's be realistic. You're an expensive liability, and sorting out your annuity means waiting for a miracle. The market crashed, remember? And the North Wing? It's being converted into a private cinema. Do you think this aesthetic? He swept his hand around the cavernous room filled with imported antiques. Allows for baggage? He used the word baggage like a dagger, aimed precisely at my chest. The pain was so intense it was physical. I felt my lungs seize up. Baggage. I was his mother. But, Jonathan, the doctor's bills, I need ongoing care. And the trust fund your father set aside for me, it's empty. How did it empty so fast? He laughed. It wasn't a sympathetic laugh. It was a cold, superior bark that bounced off the imported Italian marble. The Phantom Trust Fund. Always a story, isn't it? Look, there was a misunderstanding with Father's estate planning. Things were reallocated. Legal and clean, I assure you. Now, your driver is outside. Please, Mother, don't make a scene. My investors arrive in an hour. The casual cruelty of his dismissal was a revelation. It wasn't just greed. It was contempt. He didn't just want my money. He wanted me gone, erased from the narrative of his magnificent life. In that moment, standing in the shadow of his betrayal, something in me snapped. The vulnerable, pleading mother died on that cold, marble floor. A cold, hard realization settled in my soul. Begging would not save me. Only absolute, strategic war could. I straightened my spine, a movement so subtle he didn't notice. I was no longer crying. The tears were frozen inside. I realized in that moment that he was not my son. He was a thief who wore my son's face. My mind whispered with chilling clarity. He had stolen my home, my security, and my dignity. He thought I was old, frail, and defeated. He was about to learn that when you strip an old woman of everything, you strip her of her fear, too. I looked at him, not with love or sadness, but with the flat, assessing gaze of an enemy general. Very well, Jonathan, I said, my voice now steady, almost unnervingly calm. I will go. But you listen closely. You keep this house. You keep your cinema. You keep the illusion of your success. And I will keep my silence. For now. He visibly relaxed, mistaking my calm for surrender. Excellent. A wise decision. I turned and walked to the door, feeling the weight of his victorious gaze on my back. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the biting winter air and into the cheap taxi he had hired. The mansion gates closed behind me, sealing my past life away. As the taxi pulled away, heading towards the cheap, temporary shelter, his assistant had arranged a grim room above a laundromat. Pulled out my phone. I didn't call a friend. I called the one number I had sworn I would never use, the number of my father's most trusted and most discreet. Lawyer, a man named Mr. Finch. Jonathan didn't even know he existed. The game has just begun, my son. And you just gave your old mother the greatest motivation, the forged signature, and the truth. The room above the laundromat smelled perpetually of bleach and stale dryer sheets, a stark contrast to the custom-scented air of Jonathan's mansion. It was here, amidst the humming vibrations of industrial washing machines, that the quiet, relentless work of my revenge began. Mr. Finch had been non-committal on the phone, a cautious creature of the legal world, but the mere mention of my father's name, Harold Vance, had secured a meeting. 2 days later, sitting in Mr. Finch's impeccably quiet, wood-paneled office, a place where secrets went to be safely archived, I laid out the timeline of my financial undoing. My husband, Harold, had passed away 5 years prior, leaving me what I believed was a substantial time 0.6s, protected annuity and a separate, smaller trust fund. Jonathan, then still playing the role of the devoted son, had taken control of the paperwork, citing my grief and confusion. Over the years, the funds had simply vanished. The annuity went first, I explained, my hands resting stiffly on the polished mahogany desk. He said I had signed papers to reinvest it. High risk, high reward, he called it. The rewards never materialized, of course. Then the trust fund dwindled. He said market collapse. Mr. Finch listened, his expression neutral, time 2.6s. His eyes focused on the details. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered only cold, legal analysis, which I desperately needed. He asked for every document I had, no matter how insignificant. That evening, back in my small, lonely room, I began the impossible task of sifting through the few boxes Jonathan had allowed me to keep. These were not the things of value, but the things of memory, old photo albums, letters, and crucially, my husband Harold's old desk calendar and a dusty, forgotten file labeled 2019 Tax Audits. It was a grueling, heartbreaking process. Every photo was a reminder of the Jonathan who was, the boy who had loved me, juxtaposed against the monster who had thrown me out. I was about to give up, succumbing to the overwhelming fatigue and despair, when I found it, tucked deep inside the tax file, hidden beneath 2 years of outdated receipts. It was a single, flimsy carbon copy of a document, a detailed outline of the Harold Vance Special Provisions Trust. This trust was separate from everything else. It wasn't an annuity. It wasn't a savings account. It was a substantial, offshore investment fund, established decades ago, designed to mature upon Harold's death, providing me with guaranteed, unassailable security. The amount was staggering enough to secure my life and a comfortable legacy for any grandchildren. But the real discovery was the attached signature page. Harold's distinctive, sprawling signature was at the bottom, designating me as the sole, irrevocable beneficiary. Below that, however, was a second line, marked Dissolution Authorization. And on that line, a signature. Mine. I held the paper under the harsh fluorescent lamp, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew that signature. I knew every loop, every flourish of my own handwriting. But this signature was stiff, time 0.6s, hurried, and subtly wrong. The V in Vance was too sharp. The crossing of the T was too high. I realized in that searing moment that this was not a market collapse or a reinvestment gone wrong. It was a crime. He hadn't just mismanaged my money. He had forged my authorization to dissolve a trust that was legally mine. This was the foundation of his palace, the stolen bricks of his success. My rage wasn't hot. It was surgical. It gave me a laser-like focus. The pain of the betrayal transformed into a cold, powerful instrument of war. The next morning, I returned to Mr. Finch. I slid the carbon copy across his desk. He picked it up, put on his reading glasses, and began to read. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant sounds of city traffic. When he finally looked up, his face was still neutral, but his eyes held a glimmer of something that looked like professional satisfaction. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice low. "This document, if proven to be a forgery, changes everything. The theft of a personal annuity is one thing. Fraudulent dissolution of a protected trust is federal territory. A judge will not look kindly on a son who does this to his mother." My internal monologue was calm, calculating. He thought I was too old, too stupid, too heartbroken to notice. He forgot that a woman who has endured a life with Harold Vance knows how to find a hidden truth. "Mr. Finch," I responded, my voice clear and steady. "I need you to find the original. And when you do, I need a forensic handwriting expert. I want absolute proof. And Jonathan must not know. Not a single breath." He nodded once, a terse, "Professional agreement. This will be slow, Mrs. Vance," and it will be expensive. But I believe we have an excellent foundation for action." The cost didn't matter. Jonathan had bankrolled the start of his own destruction without knowing it. The real power was not the money. It was the secret. The silence was my greatest weapon, allowing the thief to sleep soundly, while the avenger meticulously built the cage around him. The last hidden key and my sanctuary. The forensic investigation began immediately, but legal processes are glacial, and waiting became its own form of torture. I needed power, and I needed leverage that wasn't solely reliant on Mr. Finch's timeline. Jonathan had secured the financial present. I needed to find the hidden reserve of the past. My husband, Harold, for all his sternness and obsession with propriety, had always prepared for the worst-case scenario. He was a man who believed in contingencies, backdoors, and layers of secrecy, a trait I was now profoundly grateful for. He had hated banks, which is why the massive trust was offshore. He also hated leaving physical evidence in the family home, which is why he had always maintained a small, anonymous office downtown, used purely for storing documents he considered too sensitive for domestic exposure. Jonathan knew of this office, but believed it had been liquidated years ago. Rummaging through the bottom of an antique sewing basket, a completely illogical place for anything important, I found it, a tarnished, heavy bronze key, marked only with the number 113 and a tiny symbol resembling a gargoyle's head. Harold had once joked it was the key to his prepper vault. I immediately recognized the gargoyle as the architectural motif of the old mercantile building on 44th Street, the same building where Harold had kept his discreet office, long before Jonathan began managing his assets. The next morning, I took the bus downtown, feeling like a spy in my own life. The mercantile building was imposing, forgotten by time, and slightly ominous. I walked past the receptionist's desk, my cheap coat feeling heavy and conspicuous, and took the ancient, rattling service elevator to the 11th floor. The key fit the lock of Unit 113. It wasn't an office. It was a storage closet, small, dusty, and climate-controlled. Inside, there was no furniture, only a single, heavy-duty fireproof safe, bolted to the concrete floor. It was a digital safe, not a keyed one. I sank onto the dusty floor, a wave of familiar despair washing over me. A combination. Of course. Harold would never be so simple as to write it down. But then, a cold realization struck me. Harold had a peculiar, almost childlike obsession with dates, but only those tied to his failures, not his success. Time 0.92s. I had always found it strange. His favorite was the date he lost his first major business venture, June 18th, 1975. My fingers trembled as I entered the sequence, 06181975. Click. The safe opened with a low, satisfying thud. Inside, it was a treasure trove of pure, unassailable power. Not gold or jewels, but paper. Neatly stacked, professionally organized, and labeled in Harold's meticulous hand. First, the original, notarized documents for the Special Provisions Trust, confirming my irrevocable beneficiary status and containing the original, genuine signature page. This was the proof of Jonathan's forgery. Second, a stack of investment bonds, bearer shares in an old, quiet utility company. These were liquid, anonymous, and worth nearly $500,000. They were my war chest, my immediate sanctuary. Third, and most devastatingly, a sealed, signed letter to his primary attorney, not Finch, to be opened only upon confirmation of his death and evidence of immediate family fraud. The letter explicitly detailed Jonathan's inherent greed and outlined a specific plan for reversal, naming the 3 key shell companies Jonathan had used over the years to launder funds from the main estate accounts. The silence was now broken by the pounding of my own heart, a rhythm of pure, cold victory. Jonathan had spent years building his fortress on sand, unaware that Harold had built a deep, secret bunker right next to time 0.92s. Harold's foresight was my lifeline. Jonathan's arrogance was his noose. I sat there for an hour, processing the weight of the documents. I wasn't helpless. I was financially independent right now. I had the means to pay Mr. Finch and the expert team. I had an escape hatch. I gathered the bearer bonds, my sanctuary fund, and the original trust documents. I left the letter and the shell company details for Mr. I closed the safe, locked the door to Unit 113, and walked out of the mercantile building a completely different woman. I wasn't going back to the laundromat. I cashed a small portion of the bearer bonds, enough for immediate needs, and rented a small, high-security apartment under a pseudonym in a different county. My new sanctuary. That night, I called Mr. Finch. Mr. Finch? The evidence is secured. I have the original trust documents and a small fund to cover your immediate fees. The game is fully funded. We move now, and we move silently. The pause on his end was long, perhaps sensing the shift in my tone from victim to commander. Understood. Mrs. Vance. He finally replied. I'll prepare the initial complaints. We are no longer defending. We are attacking. The quiet lawyer and the sleepless nights. Moving into the new, anonymous apartment felt like stepping into a cold, clinical war room. There were no sentimental objects, only a functional kitchen, a sturdy desk, and walls that absorbed sound. This was where the strategist, the quiet avenger, would live. I was no longer a victim. I was a project manager overseeing the complete demolition of my son's life. My immediate task was establishing a clandestine, efficient relationship with Mr. Finch. I insisted on absolute compartmentalization. I would communicate only through encrypted email and burner phones, meeting only in neutral, obscure locations, a public library meeting room, a park bench deep in a neighboring town, never his office or my new apartment. Jonathan had proven his capability for espionage and betrayal. I would not underestimate his resources or his ruthlessness. Mr. Finch, I stated during our first clandestine meeting in a bleak, underused coffee shop, my voice barely above a murmur. We need 2 things: undeniable proof of the forgery and absolute secrecy regarding the Special Provisions Trust. He nodded, adjusting his glasses. The forensic expert is already at work on the scanned copy, but we need to file a preliminary action. To freeze his assets. We have to show the court probable cause of fraud. This involves exposing the forgery. Once we do that, Jonathan will know we're coming. I realized in that moment that exposure was inevitable, but the timing was everything. We don't freeze his assets yet, I countered, looking him straight in the eye. If we freeze them now, he'll panic and begin moving everything into untraceable domains. He has 3 shell companies, as per Harold's letter. We need to let him feel safe. Let him continue to use those channels. We allow the theft to continue, but we track it. We build a case so devastating that when we strike, it's not just civil, it's criminal. I want prison time. Mr. Finch. He stole my life and my father's legacy. He deserves the full consequences. The lawyer studied me, a flicker of respect or perhaps alarm in his eyes. The grieving, weeping mother was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating woman. That shifts the strategy, Mrs. Vance. We move from recovery to punitive action. That requires more time and extensive investigative accounting. Time, and money are no object, I replied simply. Knowing the $500,000 in anonymous bearer bonds provided me the necessary runway. You hire the best private investigators and forensic accountants. Their entire job is to chart the flow of the stolen trust money from its point of dissolution to Jonathan's new mansion and his company accounts. Every purchase, every luxury, every investment must be traced back to my signature he forged. The sleepless nights became my most productive time. While Jonathan was presumably entertaining investors in his cinema, I was sitting at my desk, poring over the documents Harold left behind and the detailed reports Mr. Finch's team generated. The forensic accountant's report was damning. Jonathan had used the dissolved trust money almost immediately, a massive 7-figure transfer labeled as seed capital for his new venture. The timing matched the forgery perfectly. The internal monologue during those long, silent hours was relentless. He was so sloppy, so arrogant. He believed his title, son of Harold Vance, was a shield against consequences. He never imagined his father would predict his treachery. He thought an old woman couldn't read a ledger or hire a team that could. I charted the shell companies myself. Company A bought the luxury cars. Company B funded the renovations of the mansion. Company C acted as the pass-through for the final. Massive down payment on the property itself. Every line item on the forensic report was a physical object. Luxurious choice, an expression of his contempt for me. The marble floor I stood on when he threw me out, paid for with my lost security. The greatest mistake the betrayer makes is believing their victim is passive. I was not passive. I was the mountain, and I was accumulating the landslide. I learned the language of financial crime, money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. I internalized the criminal statutes. I was preparing not just for court, but for the final confrontation. I needed to know the full, absolute measure of his guilt so that when I spoke, every word would be a hammer blow. The goal was no longer merely winning back the money. The goal was to ensure his complete, unequivocal, public downfall. His greed had led him to commit a crime with a clear path to prison. I was simply making sure the path was well lit. Gathering the evidence, brick by brick. The investigation moved from financial forensics to physical evidence collection, a phase that demanded extraordinary patience and discretion. The goal was to tie every luxury item Jonathan possessed directly to the fraudulently dissolved trust, proving intent and enjoyment of the stolen funds. This wasn't just about documents. It was about showing a judge and, eventually, a jury the sheer breadth of his theft. Mr. Finch's private investigators were excellent ghosts. They focused on 3 areas: the mansion's construction record, the acquisition of his high-value assets, and most critically, his communication records around the time of the forgery. The mansion, his palace, was a monument to his arrogance. The investigators procured copies of the construction company's invoices. The specialized, imported Italian marble for the foyer, the very spot where he had called me baggage, had a direct payment link to Company B, one of the shell corporations funded by the stolen trust money. The new private cinema in the North Wing, which he had evicted me to build, was paid for by a wire transfer routed through the same fraudulent channels. I realized the profound symbolism of his crime. He had literally built his kingdom on the rubble of my life. Every cold surface I had touched that day was a testament to his betrayal. The discovery fueled my determination, transforming hurt into a cold, focused resolve. The high-value assets were even more damning. His collection of vintage sports cars, his custom-built yacht, the extravagant jewelry he had purchased for his new fiancée, all traced back, with meticulous and irrefutable clarity, to the funds from the Special Provisions Trust. The accountant's ledger looked like a shopping list of my financial ruin. The most potent brick, however, came from a former disgruntled employee of Jonathan's, found by the investigators. This source provided copies of internal company emails from the period immediately following Harold's death. One email, sent from Jonathan to his financial controller, explicitly discussed expediting the liquidation of the old woman's redundant fund and used the callous phrase, "She won't notice. She's too busy grieving." This wasn't just evidence of forgery. It was proof of premeditated intent, a malicious conspiracy to defraud a vulnerable elder. This email was the key that unlocked the prison door. I reviewed every piece of evidence Mr. Finch sent me, not just for accuracy, but for dramatic impact. I was constructing a narrative for the court, a story of a heartless son who systematically stripped his grieving mother of her security to finance his lavish lifestyle. The weight of the evidence became immense stack of binders that, when combined, would crush his defense. My internal monologue shifted from planning to visualizing. He thought he had outsmarted his deceased father and his elderly mother. He failed to account for the fact that a mother knows her son's weaknesses better than anyone. His weakness was his belief in his own genius. He left a trail of breadcrumbs because he never imagined anyone would bother to follow them into the dark. Mr. Finch was ready. The private investigators had confirmed every detail of the paper trail. The forensic expert had a signed affidavit stating, unequivocally, that the dissolution authorization signature was a forgery. The disgruntled employee's emails sealed the intent. "Mrs. Vance?" Mr. Finch stated over our secure line. We have enough for immediate asset seizure, civil recovery, and a criminal referral that will guarantee a grand jury indictment. The charges will include wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud a senior citizen. The punishment is severe. And the timing, Mr. Finch? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. We strike at the peak of his perceived invincibility, he replied. We file the motion for the ex parte, injunction, and the criminal complaint simultaneously. I recommend next Tuesday, during the press conference for his latest acquisition. He will be at his most public, his most boastful. I closed my eyes. The strategy was complete. The quiet war was over. The public execution was scheduled. There would be no retreat, no settlement. There was only the necessary, devastating payoff: the public humiliation and the false claim. The week leading up to the strike was agonizing, a slow burn of suppressed tension. I lived every moment in a heightened state of awareness, tracking Jonathan's movements through the press and social media. He was riding high. He was the city's darling entrepreneur, young, aggressive, and seemingly untouchable. He was holding a major press conference on Tuesday to announce a massive expansion and the acquisition of a historic city landmark. It was to be his crowning moment of triumph. I saw the interview clips. He was charismatic, impeccably dressed, and dangerously confident. In one interview, when asked about his humble start, he gave a calculated nod to my deceased husband, Harold, and then, with breathtaking coldness, dismissed me entirely. My father left a complex estate, Jonathan smoothly told the reporter, practiced look of solemnity on his face. My mother, bless her heart, was simply not prepared for the responsibilities of managing significant capital. She had some difficulties, some poor investments in her later years. We had to make difficult, responsible decisions to safeguard the core assets and ensure the family name remained solvent. He had the audacity to rewrite history, to paint me as the incompetent, failing elder, while he was the responsible savior. My blood boiled, but I maintained the silence. This public lie was exactly what I needed. It was the peak of his hubris, the perfect moment for the catastrophic fall. The internal monologue was a mantra of cold, focused fury. He thinks he is performing on a stage of his own making. He doesn't know that I am the playwright, the director, and the one holding the curtain rope, ready to drop the entire set on his head. I was scheduled to be in Mr. Finch's downtown office on Tuesday morning, not to witness the press conference, but to physically sign the final, binding civil complaints and the criminal referral packet that would be walked across the street to the U. Attorney's office. But on Monday evening, I made a small, crucial change to the plan. I instructed Mr. Finch to prepare a simple letter addressed to Jonathan, listing the amount of the fraudulently dissolved trust, the names of the shell companies, and ending with a single line: the original signature is in the hands of the U.S. Attorney. Why send this now, Mrs. Vance? Mr. Finch asked, confused. It gives him warning. It gives him panic. I corrected him, my voice firm. He will receive it Tuesday morning, right before his press conference. He needs to walk onto that stage knowing, for the first time, that the ground beneath him is poison, but he must pretend it's solid. I want his pride to be his undoing. I want him forced to smile for the cameras while the blood drains from his face. Tuesday morning arrived, crisp and bright. Beautiful day for ruin. I was signing the final document, the one authorizing the full criminal referral, when my phone, the burner I used only for tracking the news, showed a live feed of Jonathan walking up to the podium. He looked magnificent. He waved, he smiled, his arm around his beautiful fiancée. He started his speech with an elaborate flourish, detailing the acquisition, talking about his unwavering vision. Then, Mr. Finch's junior associate walked into the back of the conference room and handed an envelope to Jonathan's personal assistant. The assistant, confused by the strange, plain envelope, walked it directly onto the stage and handed it to Jonathan. Jonathan paused his speech, clearly annoyed by the interruption. He ripped open the envelope, skimmed the contents, and in the next instant, the color visibly drained from his face. His confident smile cracked. The triumphant, polished veneer shattered, revealing the desperate, cornered animal underneath. He stuffed the letter into his jacket pocket and tried to restart, but the air had left his lungs. He stumbled over his word, time 0.6, his eyes darting frantically towards the exits. He was no longer looking at the camera. He was looking for escape. I was not physically there, but I was the ghost in the machine. I had poisoned his moment. This internal monologue was one of absolute satisfaction. He thought he had destroyed me quietly in the foyer. I chose to destroy him publicly, at the pinnacle of his borrowed glory. The prison of his own mind has just locked him in, and the world is watching. Mr. Finch finished the paperwork. It's done. Mrs. Vance. The injunction is filed, seizing all assets immediately. The criminal referral is stamped. We wait for the FBI to move. I stood up, feeling a sudden, strange lightness. Let's watch the news. Mr. Finch. The curtain is about to drop. The confrontation. The veil lifts. The moment Jonathan received the letter during his press conference was a visible tremor that rippled through the financial world. He cut the conference short, citing an unexpected family emergency. The news cycle instantly shifted from his triumph to speculation about his sudden, panicked exit. This gave Mr. Finch and the authorities a crucial few hours of tactical advantage. Later that afternoon, the news broke. Not the full criminal story yet, but the civil one. Jonathan Vance's assets, including his mansion, his company accounts, and his luxury vehicles, were frozen by an ex parte injunction filed by the estate of Harold Vance, citing massive, detailed financial fraud and forgery. The headline flashed across every major network. Wunderkind exec's empire frozen amidst fraud allegations. The shock was immediate and paralyzing to him. But the final, necessary act of my revenge required me to look him in the eye one last time. I instructed Mr. Finch to secure a single Non-negotiable meeting in his own conference room. Sterile. Neutral ground. This was not a negotiation. Time .65s. It was the delivery of his sentence. When Jonathan walked into the room, he was a wreck. His expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered fear. He saw me sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table, next to Mr. Finch. I was wearing a simple, dark dress, the antithesis of his flash, and I looked utterly calm. "Mother, what is this madness?" he spat, his voice hoarse. He pounded the table. "You've ruined me. My accounts are frozen. My investors are pulling out. Are you settling a score over the house? Fine, take the damn house. It was always yours." I didn't flinch. I let him rage, enjoying the spectacle of his self-destruction. Mr. Finch simply slid a large binder across the table. Jonathan snatched it, flipping through the tabs that contained the forensic reports, the bank records, and the evidence of the shell companies. He stopped at a page marked Exhibit C, Dissolution Forgery. "It's not the house, Jonathan," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. "It's the Special Provisions Trust. The $10 million your father left me, that was outside the main estate. The money you stole by forging my signature." He looked, time 126, his face pale, his denial instinctive. "That fund was complicated. It required restructuring. You wouldn't understand the capital gains." "I understand forgery. Jonathan," I interrupted, leaning forward. "I understand wire fraud. I understand conspiracy to defraud an elderly person. I understand prison sentences." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the single, flimsy carbon copy of the forged document, and beside it, the original, genuine signature page from Harold's safe. I placed them side by side on the table. "Look at the V in Vance," I instructed, my tone purely pedagogical. "Yours is too sharp. You were in a hurry, weren't you? You were so busy calculating your millions, you forgot that a mother knows her own handwriting better than any notary. You didn't just steal money. You committed identity theft." The veil lifted entirely. His eyes finally dropped the pretense of business jargon and stared, wide and horrified, at the documents. He finally saw the depth of the cage I had built. "The money funded your entire life here, didn't it?" I continued, relentlessly pressing the attack. "The Italian marble foyer you threw me out on? My 10 million paid for that. The private cinema in the North Wing, where I was supposed to sleep, paid for by my security. You literally built your palace on my ruin, Jonathan. That is not just financial mismanagement. It is moral treason." His shoulders slumped. The fighter in him evaporated. He looked utterly defeated, broken not by the government, but by the old woman he had dismissed as baggage. I realized in that final, triumphant moment that his greatest pain was not the loss of the money, but the shame of being outsmarted by the woman he considered weak and disposable. His contempt for me was the flaw in his entire scheme. "What do you want?" he whispered, desperation replacing arrogance. "I can get a loan. I can pay you back. I'll give you double. Please, Mother, don't do this. You're destroying the family name." The family name was destroyed the moment you forged my name, I replied, standing up. And I don't want your money. I want justice, and I want the world to know the true cost of betraying the one who gave you life. The dialogue of desperation and denial. Jonathan's immediate reaction to the physical evidence and my unwavering demand for justice was a terrifying mix of denial and raw, pleading desperation. The suit and the arrogance had melted away, leaving only the scared, spoiled boy beneath. "Mother, wait! Don't listen to him," he cried, pointing a trembling finger at Mr. Finch. "He's misleading you. This is negotiable. It's always negotiable." I remained standing, maintaining a terrifying distance, allowing him to unravel completely. "There are no negotiations, Jonathan. You stole money meant for my survival. Money your father explicitly set aside to protect me. You didn't just steal from me. You defied your father's final wishes." He lunged forward, trying to grab my arm, but Mr. Finch subtly stepped between us. Jonathan appealed directly to me, his voice cracking. "I needed it. The market was tight. That initial seed money, that big infusion, was the only way to secure the properties and make the company viable. I was going to pay it back. Mother, I swear, as soon as the IPO launched, I would have quietly transferred it back, and you would never have known." "You wouldn't have known?" I repeated, a low, cold laugh escaping my lips. "I would have been dead, Jonathan. Dead in that cheap room above the laundromat, unable to afford the medication for my heart condition. Your calculation wasn't about a temporary loan. It was about ensuring my silence through my financial destitution. That is not a son, Jonathan. That is a parasite." His denial hardened into defiance, the last desperate resort of a cornered man. "But the papers were confusing. The estate was messy. You were emotional. Any court will understand the pressure on a son trying to manage an inheritance." "No court will understand forgery, Jonathan," I stated, pulling out the evidence of the shell companies and the damning emails from his former controller. "We have emails. We have bank wire documentation. We have forensic proof that the money went directly into buying the mansion and funding your personal luxuries. This wasn't mismanagement. This was premeditated theft. A jury will see a wealthy, entitled man who committed a felony against his own mother." He buried his face in his hands, then looked up, his eyes bloodshot, searching mine for any trace of the old, loving mother. "Please, Mother, think of your grandchildren. My life will be destroyed. My business, my reputation, everything. If you file the criminal charges, I'll go to prison. I'll lose everything. You'll be responsible for putting your own son in a cell." The silence was my greatest weapon in this exchange. I let his pleas hang in the air, allowing him to fully realize the catastrophic weight of his actions. I met his gaze, my eyes dry and unwavering. I already lost my son 5 years ago. He was replaced by a thief who left me abandoned and financially ruined. I am not responsible for putting you in a cell, Jonathan. Your greed, your contempt, and your forged signature did that. I am simply ensuring the system holds you accountable. He launched into a frantic, final plea, citing his achievements, his importance to the community, his future. It was pure narcissism, a total lack of remorse for the victim only for the consequences to himself. You said you had poor investments. Remember? I concluded, cutting off his torrent of words. You just made the worst investment of your life, Jonathan. You invested your entire future into believing I was too frail to fight back. And now, you must pay the dividend. I stood up fully, signaling the end. Mr. Finch moved to the door. Wait, where are you going? Jonathan shrieked. I am going to get a very expensive, very legitimate new condo, I replied, turning to leave. And you, Jonathan, are going to spend the night thinking about how those cold marble floors you loved so much compare to a concrete prison cell. As I stepped out, leaving him alone in the sterile conference room with his evidence and his spiraling fear, I heard his voice one last time, a choked, pathetic cry. Mother, I'll beg for forgiveness. I did not turn back. The time for begging was over. The time for justice had arrived. The final payoff: arrest and absolute ruin. The criminal referral was swift and decisive. The combination of the irrefutable forensic evidence, the detailed financial trail connecting the trust money to Jonathan's personal assets, and the damning emails proving malicious intent meant the U. Attorney's office moved immediately. The following morning, I was settled in my new sanctuary apartment, quietly drinking tea, watching the unfolding drama on the news. The coverage was explosive. The freezing of assets was one thing. The news that Jonathan Vance was under an investigation for multiple counts of felony fraud and identity theft was seismic. The climax came around midday. The news channels, still covering the scandal live, had helicopters hovering over Jonathan's mansion. I watched, my heart beating with a steady, clinical rhythm knot of fear, but of profound completion. A caravan of unmarked black vehicles pulled up to the gate. Federal agents, in windbreakers bearing the acronyms of financial crime enforcement units, walked quickly up the drive. A reporter, breathless on the scene, confirmed, "We are witnessing the execution of a federal warrant. Sources confirm an arrest is imminent." Minutes later, the main door of the mansion opened. Jonathan emerged, flanked by two agents. He was no longer the arrogant mogul. He was reduced to a caricature of ruin. He hadn't changed clothes since our confrontation. His suit was creased, his face gray and swollen, his hands restrained behind his back. He stumbled down the marble steps, the steps paid for with my stolen security, and was guided into the back of an unmarked vehicle. The camera zoomed in as the car pulled away, showing his utterly defeated profile through the tinted window. The caption beneath the image was devastatingly simple: Jonathan Vance arrested, fraud against elderly mother. The fallout was immediate and absolute. The company, already reeling from the asset freeze, imploded instantly. Investors fled, creditors swarmed, and the board of directors initiated emergency procedures to distance themselves from the disgraced CEO. His fiancée was seen leaving the mansion with suitcases, her engagement ring conspicuously absent. The payoff was not just financial, though Mr. Finch assured me that the civil case, now backed by the criminal proceedings, would guarantee the full recovery of the $10 million plus substantial damages and interest. The true payoff was the public spectacle of his humiliation. He had sought to erase me quietly. I had ensured his ruin was broadcast globally. The greatest revenge is served cold and publicly. He wanted the spotlight of success. I gave him the full spotlight of his shame. His initial bail hearing was the final, formal humiliation. The judge, having reviewed the evidence of aggravated fraud against an elderly relative, set an astronomically high bond, explicitly stating the defendant was a flight risk and a danger to the financial security of others. Jonathan, unable to access any of his now frozen funds, was remanded to federal custody. The walls of a federal prison were closing around him, funded indirectly by the life he had stolen from me. I received a call from Mr. Finch that evening, time 0.92s. He's detained. Mrs. Vance. The trial will be long, but the evidence is overwhelming. He is facing decades in prison. And the mansion? I asked, my voice flat. It will be liquidated, along with all his assets, to satisfy the civil judgment and restitution orders. You will get everything back, and then some, he confirmed. Good, I simply said. I don't want the house. Mr. Finch, I want the money back. Yes, but I want to ensure every penny of that sale, every single piece of that Italian marble, is traceable back to the price he paid for his contempt. I want him to know that the single decision to throw out his mother cost him his entire future. My strategy had worked flawlessly. The victim who had been discarded like baggage had orchestrated the complete and irreversible collapse of her betrayer. The anger had finally begun to recede, leaving behind not emptiness, but a quiet, enduring strength. The work was done. The legacy, a new beginning for me. The immediate aftermath of Jonathan's arrest brought a strange, profound silence. The rage that had fueled me for months dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of finality. The process of recovering the stolen funds and liquidating his assets was methodical, time 0.6s, guided by Mr. Finch. I watched the news reports detailing the fall of the Vance empire. Detached, like reading the end of a very difficult novel. I made good on my word. I took the settlement. It was more than enough to restore the Special Provisions Trust and secure my future, providing me with the safety and dignity Jonathan had tried to steal. I sold the newly acquired grand condo I'd purchased with the initial bearer bonds and bought a smaller, sunnier home near the coast. It was modest, clean, and entirely mine, built on a foundation of integrity, not fraud. The process of healing was slow, centered around the redefinition of family and strength. I realized that family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty and action. Jonathan, my son, had failed that definition spectacularly. The people who had become my new family were the cold, calculating professionals, Mr. Finch, the investigators, the accountant who had fought for justice alongside me. They saw me as a client, yes, but also as a comrade in a necessary war. My internal monologue now focused on building, not demolishing. The coldness was replaced by a quiet warmth, the kind that comes after a long, difficult winter. I spent time contemplating the entire ordeal. Time on 1.92s. The most important lesson was that my husband, Harold, had known Jonathan. Harold's contingency plan, the secret office, the safe, the explicit letter detailing Jonathan's weaknesses was the greatest act of love and protection he could have offered me. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me the strategic instructions to survive and counter his son's betrayal. It was his final, silent partnership with me. I decided my legacy would be to help others who faced similar, devastating betrayals. I used a portion of the recovered funds and damages to establish the Harold and Eleanor Vance Foundation for Elder Financial Justice. Its mission was to provide anonymous legal counsel, forensic accounting services, and safe housing for elderly individuals victimized by family or institutional financial fraud. I dedicated my time to overseeing its creation, ensuring it had the resources and discretion necessary to fight these quiet, often overlooked crimes. I had been thrown out, discarded, and underestimated. But in the end, I had transformed. The vulnerable victim became the quiet strategist, and the strategist became the triumphant avenger. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged not only intact, but fundamentally stronger. My vulnerability had been a weapon, perfectly disguising the steel spine I inherited from decades of quiet endurance. Jonathan's eventual sentence, a lengthy term in federal prison, was a footnote to my new life. I never visited, never wrote. He was a closed chapter, a necessary piece of the past that had been excised to ensure a healthy future. I was finally free. Free from his shadow, free from the necessity of silence, and free to build a life defined by my own strength and resilience. The house near the coast was filled with blue sunlight, a stark contrast to the shadows of the mansion. My future was one of purpose, built on the foundations of the justice I had fought so hard to secure. The sun sets over the ocean, outside my window now, casting a warm, golden light across the room. It's a far cry from the cold, polished marble of Jonathan's foyer where I was discarded. The memory of that day still lives with me, not as a source of pain, but as a stark reminder of the depth of human cruelty and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. What I learned through that harrowing journey from victim to avenger was the true meaning of strength. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, strategic, and deeply rooted in self-respect. Jonathan saw me as an easily manipulated elder. He never saw the fire that burns in a mother protecting her dignity and her future. He forgot that the one who nurtures life often knows best how to dismantle a threat to it. I think of Harold often, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. His foresight was the blueprint for my defense. He taught me the most powerful lesson: always have a secret source of power, an anonymous sanctuary, and a plan. And most importantly, never mistake kindness for weakness. The foundation is my legacy now. Every time we help an elderly person who has been betrayed, I feel a quiet vindication. It's a way of ensuring that Jonathan's crime, the very crime that sought to break me, is used instead to build a shield for others. The money recovered wasn't just my security. It became the security for countless others. I am often asked if I regret putting my own son in prison. The answer is simple. I regret that he became the man who made it necessary. I secured justice, not revenge. I ensured accountability, not settlement. And in the process, I salvaged something far more valuable than any fortune: my peace, my independence, and my enduring strength. The pawn truly did become the queen. Thank you for listening.